here we are. Looks like I'm trying to make a series of these. Still shaking off that cold. I'm hoping to make one every day, and then when I've made a few of them, when I'm a handful in, I'll start putting them up one at a time, and it will feel like I'm doing one a day, but I have to keep a few in hand in case I get sick. So I think today's video, the idea of it, I've been thinking all day about what to talk about with videos. Now I'm making them again, and I think the idea I'm gonna go with today, and we'll see where we spiral off to, it's gonna be called the cost of recovery. And that's a funny thing to be doing now, because that's almost like something I should have made when I first started. This will almost be like a video I would have made at the beginning, you know. So it's going to be interesting because I'm a lot wiser now, even than I was comparatively than I was when I started making my first video. I'm further down the road, you know, as I'm sure I'm sure many of my contemporaries that make these videos have this experience, you know. So I'm going to make a kind of an entry-level video, I guess, with a little bit of retrospective. So the last video I made was the one about the power of so what, and how, and so these two videos are going to bookend each other in a way. To be able to say so what, which I expressly found I'm probably not there yet, would be a healthy place to get to. I can imagine, it's not my place to presume on anybody else's development, but I imagine Ollie is pretty good at saying so what to people, you know. I imagine he's pretty there, you know. He can go, I'm pretty sure he can look a narcissist in the eye when they're pulling that number of trying to subvert the situation and try to shame you about something from your past, or something you've forgotten to do, or something that they've set you up to fail at. And I'm pretty sure Ollie's the kind of guy that could look somebody in the eye and go, you know, so what, and many others too, right? So that's what I think that looks like, you know. At the other end, the cost of recovery is a kind of a conversation you'd have with somebody who's about to go no contact, or somebody who's just come out of a divorce, or somebody who has been dumped by a narcissistic partner, and the narcissistic partner has made some overtures about getting back together, you know. So that's kind of where this video is. And why am I doing it now? Well, I think because I've got a lot of stuff, a lot of chickens have come home to roost for me just lately, and it is time to reflect, because despite what I said earlier, I've quite successfully, I don't feel comfortable saying that, I have pursued recovery over the narcissistic entrapment. So I've done that. I haven't faltered. I'm going to talk a little bit about, excuse me, I'm going to make a cup of tea. Oh, well, it's brewing right now. How do I enter this thing? I'm in a situation right now. It's very peculiar. This is going to take me off in all directions. So hang on to that title, the the cost of recovery, because you might not be hearing it for a while. I've had a lot of problems in my personal relationship with my partner. She's got a very complex, she's had quite a complex lot past, and I mean this with nothing but respect, right? This is not a superiority moment. This is an acknowledgement moment. She is damaged by that stuff. And she has it together a lot better than I do. However, the stoicism I've had to have because of the narcissism and because of looking after my mother and because of the kind of the patience I've had to develop, and the change of focus away from my needs to another person. This is quite difficult. This is quite difficult for men to do. In my experience, I don't think men really, a lot of men, not all men, I didn't really start to grow up till I was about 40. Now, I had lots going for me before then. I wasn't an adolescent throughout my 30s. But when I look back now, and I look at how I thought and the things I did and the things I believed, even in my 30s, I'm shocked. And there are issues here about maturation to do with narcissistic abuse, by the way. And I don't know anything about what it's like to be a woman with narcissistic abuse, so I'm not going to go there. But I would not be surprised if most of the men in this community who make videos, and many of you that watch the videos, I would not be surprised if a lot of you know what I'm talking about. I think, again, Ollie's going to get a lot of mentions today. I think Ollie's made some pretty, I seem to recall he's made some pretty interesting comments about the infantilization of, you know, himself and how hard it is to get out of it and become a man. And Ollie's one of the, you know, one of the guys, you know what I mean? You know, he's a guy, you know. I mean, and yeah, I wonder, you know, I wonder if it was always like that for him, from some of the things he said. And I know I was penned into a very infantile situation. Yeah. I was thinking about this the other day. He says, "What it's going to be like today? It's going to be a mess." But the growing up I've done, even outside of looking after my mum and losing my mum, the growing up I've done after that, with the realisation and the knowledge of what narcissistic abuse is and how it works, is just like off the chart. I'm like, you know, it's just it's how can I put this? It's made a man of me in a way, you know. It's that missing piece of information led me to be very subservient, very servile, those kind of words, you know. And unable to make my mind up for myself, because I think a grown up, Richard Grannon said this just the other week, a grown up will be assertive before they're angry, or instead of being angry. I mean, anger is generally like a loss of control, isn't it? And there's a whole patch of assertiveness to work through before you have to lose control, and that's if you're a grown up. But if you've been infantilized by people and treated like, you know, and feel that you don't matter, you can go into anger quite quickly, because you've lost, you know, because the situation can become, there can be an emotional hysteria that grabs you when you come under attack, and you start to feel a desperation. And you're also, according to, and this is going to mix and match a little bit, but I did some reading of R.D. Laing and his the divided self stuff, which I actually think comes into play with narcissism. People think that was meant to be a book about schizophrenia and the schizoid personality. I actually think that what maybe R.D. Laing could be describing, this is a wild theory, and I look forward to being corrected quite severely by the professionals in this community if they see this video. R.D. Laing seems to be describing being a victim of narcissism. There's a fantastic bit in the book when he's doing group therapy, and he's got a bunch of patients, and a disagreement breaks out between a couple of the patients, and the disagreement is building, and then one of them completely just disintegrates into fury and says to the other person, "You're just arguing because you want to win the point. I'm arguing because I want to preserve my existence." And what we have there, I think, is a very good description of what the narcissistic victim grows into. Somebody who's not just trying to win the argument, somebody who's trying to fight for their kind of psychological survival, because every time they lose an argument or are humiliated or are belittled, undermined, in my experience, it's like I turn to lead, and I start, as I'm walking along, and the street is made of like, you know, marshmallow, and I just start sinking into the pavement, and the feeling of being completely defined and overwhelmed by this admonishment, this belittlement, it is so unbearable. And I know it could go on indefinitely. It could go on. It's not going to be 5 minutes. It's not going to be an hour. It's a curse. I've been cursed. Somebody, because they want to work through their bad feelings, right? Somebody has targeted me as a harmless reciprocant. It's you know what it's like any kind of abuse, any kind of sexual abuse, even in a way, or like a bit of violence. It's the cowardly bullying act of going, this person's not going to hurt me back, you know. And they see, I mean, I now feel very strongly, I now believe very strongly that people see each other for what they are very clearly, and they detect these other people and what their parameters are, how they behave. And so when somebody is hurt or being belittled or whatever, I mean, I'm just thinking about it, you know, I mean, I've touched on this once before. I always think it's interesting that bullies, the bullying personalities, or the bullying behaviour, is so confident that they can do this and there'll be no consequences. They think in a very short-term way. They think about there being no consequence right now, and then they've won, and they walk away thinking, yeah, that's better. I've done what I need to do. I've fed. And it's not always narcissism, by the way. It's narcissistic. It's the darker narcissistic behaviour. It doesn't mean they're a narcissistic sociopath. This is what people do. You look at transactional analysis and all of that. It's not always narcissism, right? There's a lot of crap out there for us to field, right? I was going to get around to this in a different video. Let's say it now. I could be wrong. Because there's been a lot of talk about calling other people narcissists at the drop of a hat, right? There is a way to start to determine whether somebody is a narcissistic sociopath, covert or overt, right? I've thought of this because of my experience. Somebody has to die, or it has to be possible someone could die, like through suicide, right? Stroke, go to prison, stroke, be made homeless, that kind of thing. Like, somebody has to be annihilated in the social sphere and maybe even in the material sphere. There has to be an annihilation, all right? In my opinion, it's just an opinion. I'm not an expert, I'm not a professional. Like I say, this would be better covered by one of the others, and I'm hoping if any of them watch this, they'll pick it up. There's so much bad behaviour out there already. It's not always narcissism. and just because someone disagrees with you, that's not narcissism either. Right? What's narcissism? And because you're suffering because someone's disagreed with you, or someone has made a comment that you're very angry about, that's not necessarily narcissism. Okay? Narcissism is when somebody is going to be put in a situation that is so untenable, right, that they could die. If you're talking about a sociopathic narcissist, or to dress it another way, because it's crude. I'm trying to fix this the best I can. Let me have a bit of tea. Need to get the brain cells moving. So I haven't really put it very well. Death, or a kind of death, is not far away when there's a narcissistic sociopath. Now, I have two targets in my life, my real life, who I believe are narcissistic sociopaths, right? One is my father, because that's what I was going to say a minute ago. Yeah, it's not that somebody's, you got to understand, I'm not talking about somebody being shot in the head or pushed under a car, right? I'm talking about being put in a situation where it's so desperate that death is a possibility. But it's not as simple as they kill you or make you commit suicide, although that is in there, right? Make you commit suicide. Create conditions where suicide becomes a real option. It's an absolute lack of feeling, empathy. I think I've got it. It's the lack of empathy when death is in the game, right? So, I think I'm getting closer to explaining it. Now, my mother, you see, my father abandoned her, right? My mother was very poorly, and she had there was a mental illness part of it as well, which meant that she couldn't really be held accountable for a lot of her actions or things she said. And he had loads of reasons why he left her. Now, he left her, and there was a 2-year period when I was caring for my mother remotely. I wasn't living in the same town. My sister and my brother lived near her, and nobody did anything. But I would come and visit her. I'd take her to a psychology appointment, stuff like that, right? And then me and my partner broke up of that time, my partner from that period, and by that time that happened, I was already thinking I should be there. So when we broke up, I was not that I was relieved, I was devastated, but it felt like the jigsaw pieces were falling together. So he'd abandoned my mother, who was seriously unwell, right? And then then he kind of abandoned me as well. And this, because he left me with it. Now, don't get me wrong, he set things up so things like utilities were paid and stuff like that, and so he should. It was, his property and his wife and his legal responsibility. But there were limits to the abandonment, but emotionally, personally, I was completely abandoned with it. I was put in a situation where I was, I was kind of abandoned with it, and basically, that tested me to the absolute limit of what I went beyond the limits of what I could tolerate. And that's a very interesting place to go. And I've talked about it a few times before. I've shared some information with some of my contemporaries and friends in the community. I'm not quite ready to talk to everybody about it, but when you are pushed mentally and physically through sleep deprivation and stress, and through being kind of a prisoner to the situation, when you go through the eye of the needle with that, you enter a different level of consciousness, in the same way that fasting can create a different level of consciousness. But this is very, very, very concentrated, and you start to experience things and life, and you become in my experience, I'm talking about absolute desperate isolation, and I could have had it worse. I had a guy that rang me up on the phone every day. He spoke to me every day. You know, who ran a cinema, who likes talking to me. I could have had it even worse, you know, and yet those couple of hours talking to somebody on the phone every day, I'm still here for 24. I mean, it was you kind of tap into another level of consciousness. That's what I'm trying to say. And you have to be very careful, and I don't recommend it. There's good and bad things that out there. And when if you've got the potential to be influenced by things like that, it seems like it only really happens to people who are put under enormous duress and are very isolated, which is now, of course, a lot of people would think, well, that sounds like a mental breakdown. But I've got friends who have mental breakdowns. I went to them for advice. My friend on the phone, my guy that I go for a drink with once or twice a fortnight, and I put everybody on red alert. I said, like, and nobody ever said, no, that's it, you're cracking up. I can't say too much more about this. I might even edit this bit out, but because I've completely lost my thread. Abandonment. So I was abandoned. So he abandoned my mother, and then he kind of abandoned me, and my life got worse and worse and worse, and I was very, very isolated. And then he started coming back, because they do, don't they? They basically imprison you in a situation, and you'd think they'd be happy with that, especially when they're benefiting from it. I mean, I was saving my family a fortune by my mother not being in a nursing home, and by it not affecting anybody else. But it's not enough. They come back, and my life was very challenging. You know, it was very, I mean, in the truest sense of the word, I was surviving. I was in a survival. It was a survivalist situation. It was tricky. It was wearing. It was unbearable in the end. You know, unbearable. And with PTSD as well, and anxiety and depression, and I mean, honestly. Anyway, the narcissistic sociopath will make you sit still. Will they build a cell around you, and then, like Schrodinger's cat, leave you in there, not knowing if you're alive or dead? I can't do much. I can't keep going on about this. So please, when you're making an assessment about whether or not somebody is a narcissistic sociopath rather than just narcissistic, remember, death shouldn't be very far away, or a kind of death, or a situation where the person they've imprisoned would, out of despair, take their own life, or just wither away, or get a really serious illness, because that happens too. When people are pushed too far, the body and the mind can only take so much, you know. And if you're not sure that they if you don't believe that they're not that cold, then it's not a narcissistic sociopath. The other example I've got is my partner's ex-partner and father of one of the children, and he seems like a really nice person. I got on with him really well at first, but when my partner went into hospital because she nearly died, he did step up a little bit. He did look after. He took his daughter at the weekends and stuff like that. But just a couple of months ago, it was actually a bit longer. It was the summer. funnily enough, after my partner recovered, he started getting much worse. That was what really seemed to trigger him, because we did manage, we did get through it. And I didn't really see him as being this bad, although my partner did warn me. You know, he's tricky. You know, and I hadn't seen it until she was out of hospital and getting better, and then the phone calls started coming, and he started demanding to know what she'd eaten. He started demanding to know if she'd done, how she was doing at school. He would talk to his daughter on the phone, and then she'd come in with the phone and hand it to my partner, and he would be firing at her. Now, you've got to remember, my partner had nearly lost her life to pneumonia. And when she came out of hospital, they said, you've got to take it easy. You've got to take it easy. Because if this comes back, you'll be back in hospital. And I was with her in critical for 5 days, holding her hand. I'm not messing around. You know, the woman nearly died. And at one point, I remember the day, the 24 hours, I thought her life was actually in the balance. And they were going to give her some, both her lungs, pneumonia, right? Breathing on equipment and stuff like that. She came off the major equipment, and they were doing a few things with her. She was in a room with no windows. She was fully awake for most of it, but kind of in a kind of hallucinatory sort of state. And she had a special thing she had to go in and out of. And they were going to feed her, and they were going to give her ice cream. And the stuff that was coming out of her lungs, right? The stuff that was coming out of her lungs was just gross. You know? It wasn't even like blood. It was like mud, you know? It was like brown and blood. You know what I mean? It was just awful. And she's only, you know, she's not, you know, she's a young, she wasn't even, you know, she was in her 30s, you know? And they were going to give her ice cream. Now, I know from, I have a history of asthma that's intermittent, and I have a terrible food intolerance to dairy. And if I have dairy, if I have cheese, right, especially if I have it regularly, my asthma gets much worse, and my lungs become very fluidy, and I cough up a lot of stuff, right? Now that could just be me, but I have heard from other people that dairy is the worst thing for you, right, for the lungs, you know, and you know, and I remember, like, I was doing some recording with my studio engineer guy, and I wasn't singing as well as I should. And I said to him, damn, I knew I shouldn't have had that pizza or something like that. And he knew, and he was in there like that straight away. And he said, oh, no, you haven't having the dairy, have you? And he's like a real outdoor guy. You know, when he's not recording or working, he's on his bike, he's mountaineering, he's physical. He's a physical guy. He's a bit like Ollie. He is. He's actually the same sort of type of guy. And, you know, physically. And all I could think, I didn't talk to him about it at length, but I very much got, he knew from that not to have dairy, not to have yogurt, not to have a lot of milk, not to have cheese, not to have cream, especially not cream, you see, when he's going to do a lot of physical activity. Because even though he's strong and he's fit, right, he knew it would clog him up. And they were going to give my partner, who was in bed, in critical, and very seriously, I mean, the critical unit is, I don't need to explain myself, do I? The critical unit. I mean, not everybody, as I had to have that conversation with her mum. Her mum turned around to me one day and say, did you know that, and I can't remember what the numbers were, but it was something like, do you know that their success rate for people coming out of critical is actually something like 40%? You know, it was like, maybe it might have been 60, it was somewhere in that area, but it wasn't 50-50, right? Man, even if it was 40%, that's harsh. 4 in every 10 people don't make it out of critical. Oh, it doesn't make you shiver. And believe me, she was getting the best care in the world. I mean, they were brilliant in there. And her mum, after the emergency was over, confided in me, you know. Not everybody walks out of there, you know. And there's my partner, and they're going to give her ice cream. I stopped them. I said, no, don't do that. I said, that could be the worst thing for her. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a nurse, even with all the stuff I went through looking after my mum. But I had this feeling that giving her dairy with her lungs in the condition they were in, and she was really struggling, right? I mean, I had to go home that night and sleep, and for that 12 hours overnight, I just didn't know if she was going to live. And all I could think about was the little boy, you know, and then the daughter, and what on earth was going to happen, you know, because they love their mum so much, and I was a relatively new member of the team, you know. I mean, one great thing that came out of it, you know, is I bonded with that little boy. He wasn't even 2 years old. I bonded with him a great deal during that time, and that was a great big thing. So, the ex, just a few months ago over the summer. Sorry, let's roll it back. After she came out and she needed peace and quiet and stuff like that, that's when he started hammering the nails in. And it started very slowly, but for about, and in the end, by the time we reached month 18, right, after she'd had the incident, and it took a long time for it to get better, right? I mean, I think it's taken, I think she's only really starting to feel better now. It's about 3 years. And by that, I mean, I think she's only really now back now where she was when this all started. 18 months, and he just started undermining us. And he would ring up, talk to his daughter, find out something, and then he'd been on and then the phone would get handed to Kelly, and he would start nailing her. Now you got me, she was still quite ill. This started a few months after she came out of critical, and I remember thinking, I've seen this behaviour before. This is my dad. He's just picking away at her. And he would ring first thing in the morning to talk to his daughter and say something to make her cry. And it was getting like, so the daughter was crying, my partner was shouting at him, I'm trying to get, the boy was about to go to sleep, and I've made a video about this before called Narc Exes. Oh, something about Narc Exes, you'll find it. Look for the word Narc Exes, there's 2 on there about this issue. And a few months ago, so we went through all that. In the end, he went too far, and he was on the phone to Kelly, and I just shouted at him down the phone because the little boy was just about to go to sleep. He'd been woken up because Kelly got into an argument with him, and my anger was sort of along the lines of, you two can't do this. If he wants to talk to you, he's got to ring you at a better time, because they were both getting into it, but I think he was at fault, and that put an end to it. But we'd put up with it for a long time. And then a few months, so jump forward a year, and it was the summer, and she had a confrontation with him when he was about to take the daughter away for holiday, and they were talking, and when he hadn't bought the school uniform for her and all that, she was about to start a new school in a few weeks, and so she gave him a piece of her mind, and somehow the conversation quickly derailed from being about what it should have been about, which is him providing for his daughter, and it derailed down into how much he resented the situation, and he actually said, well, I wish you had died in that hospital. Now, I know people say awful things, especially just after a breakup, but this isn't just after a breakup, this is years later. They'd broken up at least 4 or 5 years before, right? Secondly, think about saying something like that to the mother of your child. And I think if you're going to say something like that, you've got to be prepared. In sobriety, not in fury, you've got to be prepared for your daughter to know that you've said it. So that's the second target. I detect the cold, unempathic, sinister hate of the sociopath. And even the word hate is a bit too loaded, because they don't even involve themselves that much. They just see you as a logistical obstacle to them having the thing they want, which is the chalice of being able to see themselves the way they want, among other things. I'm very long-winded at the moment. Thank you for bearing with me if you've watched up to this point. This is the way I do it. If there are other people who do it better, do it differently, do it more swiftly, this is the way I do it. So I apologise if you're finding it tiresome, and you're watching the wrong video if you are. So, the cost of recovery. You're going to burn a lot of bridges. The narcissistic victim's relationship with a narcissistic family or ex is all about those bridges. It's only bridges, because they ain't going to do anything for you. You are going to be better off without them in the truest sense. But what stops you is, what if I collapse, fuck up, trip, run out of money, and we think that we're going to end up homeless, and that may have happened to some of you. And I absolutely hope to God you're all right, and in fact, I know it's happened to some of you, don't I? Because of other videos that have been made. You have my deepest sympathy and concern. This fear that, and I hope you're somewhere better right now, or you'll get somewhere better real soon. But you know what? You're still doing the right thing, because nothing is worse than being under the gun of the narcissist tyrant. Nothing is worse. Better, it's a living death anyway. So even if you die, as horrible as that is, you know what? I can imagine though how bad it is for some of you, because of course, none of you are thinking about that. Those of you that have had to make that kind of decision, you've got children to think of. That's why you can't do it, man. Man, how many of us really give a shit about ourselves that much anyway? God help us, you know. I know. Yeah, of course, somebody that's gone homeless rather than deal with their narcissistic tyrant, rather than put up with their narcissistic tyrant anymore, they've probably had to do it knowing their children are going to suffer. And you've still done the right thing. But it must be so difficult. It must be so difficult. Oh, Christ. Because it's no life at all. It's no life at all being under the narcissist's tyrannical reign. It's no life at all. It's not even something you can put up with, because it's almost kind of like, it would almost take a science fiction movie to present how sick it is. It's so sick, you know, like some movie where the kind of like alien tyrant literally drinks the blood of its victim, and then now it's weak and its blood is low, makes it go and work in a mine, you know, and then screws that person's wife while they work. That's kind of halfway there. That's what you're up against, you know. It's bad. It's bad. I mean, to be fair, narcissism has been reflected and discussed in literature for a long time. Long time. It's just, we all think of it as almost like soap opera stuff when it's in Dickens or Shakespeare or, you know, Greek mythology or anything. Of course, Narcissus. Is that Greek? I can't remember. But I should know. Sorry. We wouldn't really have any stories. It is the human story, the battle between the narcissistic individual and society and the narcissistic victim, you know. Humans wouldn't be what we are. It's going to be fascinating seeing it become a normal part of human the human dialogue and how we start to legislate for it and stuff like that, start to sort of make, I mean, maybe we'll have psychological testing for people or something like that. And it's going to be so complicated because, of course, I mean, I remember there's a great book by Philip K. Dick where these people all live in these flats, and there's a resident psychiatrist in every flat. I'm trying to remember if it's a machine. No, it's not. That's right. It's a person, and he's got a machine. Philip K. Dick does tend to use the same themes a lot, but in different settings. So there's a machine very much like the one in the film Blade Runner, which he uses to assess whether or not the replicants are human or replicant. By the way, big misunderstanding in that film. In the original book, it was narcissism and the sociopath that Philip K. Dick was going after. In the book Blade Runner is based on, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? What a title. The replicants are not in any way sympathetic. They are cold, they completely lack empathy, and the machine, some of those scenes are identical in terms of dialogue and what the point of it is. So there's other parts of it that are wildly different, but some of those scenes are identical when he tests the replicants, because they test for empathy. Philip K. Dick wrote Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep after spending a lot of time. He was fascinated by the Holocaust, studying the diaries of Nazi officers that were on duty at places like Auschwitz. And one of them wrote in the diary, the crying and screaming of the Jewish women's children keeps me awake at night. And for Philip K. Dick, who's one of my absolute heroes, a wonderful humanitarian person and terrific imaginative writer, that was the key moment where he stopped having any empathy for someone like that. For him, someone that could come to that conclusion was not to be saved. That was the limit. He kind of went, right, that's where I stop. That's where I dehumanise somebody else. That's where I say enough. That's enough. That's where he wouldn't piss on you if you were on fire, sort of thing. Okay? That's the cut-off point. I can't live in a world where with that human being in it. It's too much. That for him was the definition of the sociopath. And Blade Runner, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, believe it or not, all of it, comes from that. When Ridley Scott made the film, I think he actually made a film that had a lot more to do with the Frankenstein story and the consequences of creating life, of man creating life and playing God, seem to be playing out in Blade Runner. And we are, I think, even though there are lots of interesting contradictions left in the film from scenes that are still pretty much identical to what's in the book, they cast are fantastic, and they play the kind of slightly, actually they kind of play a slightly maybe more sort of, I don't know if I should say autistic, because I don't know enough about it, but there's a kind of an inability to be emotionally flexible or emotionally present, and they're all struggling. There's a fantastic bit when Rutger Hauer, who plays Roy Batty, has to tell some of the other replicants that they've lost another one of them's been found and shot, and he has to cope with an emotional reaction to that, and it's absolutely stunning performance moment. It's like the unemotional part of him and the emotional part of him collide, and he has to recover from it. Now, you see, that's not a sociopath as far as I understand it, although if it is, it could be even more interesting, because I do know that the sociopaths I've known, they do have emotions. You know what? I don't know what I'm talking about. There are people in this community who could really explain this better. I've made a mess of that. but at least, I mean, hopefully asking the question was worth the going. If you like the film or are prepared to watch the film, it's a remarkable conflict is being played out in the film of the issues, because Philip K. Dick had zero sympathy for these replicants. As far as he's concerned, they're emotionless, heartless monsters that should be destroyed. In the film, Ridley Scott and his scriptwriters develop it more along the lines of, well, maybe they're a legitimate life form and should be given some kind of sympathy or taken more seriously, and it makes for a better film. It gives it more curve and heft, because Philip K. Dick is that is a bleak book. It's a bleak film, but the book is bleaker. Philip K. Dick is, you know what? I think he's scared. He's scared that people could be that unfeeling. And the book is very desperate and very... It's not completely hopeless, because he keeps throwing hope in and then taking it away. I think that probably sums up Philip K. Dick. I think he was a great believer in love and a great believer in life, but I think he was scared. I think he was scared that our heartless, desperately cruel sociopaths in our midst, and that's what he's writing about, and that gets a little bit mashed up in the movie, but there are also bits they've left in, and it's, you know, maybe Ridley Scott has a very different perspective on the sociopath. You know, maybe even the sociopath should have our sympathy. That's another video. The cost of recovery.